Well, good morning. It's good to be with all the DVRing Seahawks fans at the 9:30 service. God bless you. It's good to be with you this morning. And here at UPC, as Rob just shared just a few minutes ago, every year before Thanksgiving in our worship time, we give thanks to God through our pledges and our giving commitments. And think about what we're going to give to God next year. I really want you to think about that as a spiritual exercise. And we're going to be, it started, it feels like now, last week. We are going to be bombarded over the next 7 days with messages that tell you you need to make Christmas count by buying things. And the impulse for consumerism is just at its height, it seems, the next week. And so I always say after Black Friday and Blue Monday, we all leave black and blue. And so it's something significant the Sunday before Thanksgiving and before that onslaught to say, Lord, you matter first. And we're going to consider what our giving and our gifts look like to you in this coming year. And this is for those who call UPC their home. And so we're going to do that in just a little bit. It's a very powerful time, and we're going to come forward with our pledge cards and lay them at the feet of the Lord, so to speak, under the cross. And I want that to be a very meaningful thing for you and perhaps for your family today. So today I want to do something a little different as a result of what we're going to be joining in a couple minutes. Inspired by King David's prayer in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, I want to share 8 reasons why I give, why I feel led to give as your pastor, and the convictions we have in our home. And of course, when I say I give, what I really mean is how Jenny and I approach this concept of spiritual discipline around giving. And if ever there were a top 10 list of prayers in the Bible, this prayer that David prays in 1 Chronicles 29 would most definitely make the list. The people of Israel, after centuries of tabernacles and desert pop-up tents, where they worshiped God and they brought their offerings to the Lord, they finally have a home in Jerusalem, and they have built a great temple built by their own hands in the city of Jerusalem. And it's at this moment, after all the people have brought their offerings and commitments to the Lord, that David prays this prayer. Will you join with me, starting with verse 10? David praised the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly, saying, "Praise be to you, Lord, the God of our father Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. Now, our God, we give you thanks and praise your glorious name." And now verse 14, I love this. "But who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. We are foreigners and strangers in your sight, as were all our ancestors. Our days on earth are like a shadow without hope. Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building you a temple for your holy name comes from your hand, and all of it belongs to you." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I love that. David has a lot to say about giving. And I wish my younger self had learned much sooner what it means to live with a generous heart. And as I share, I want to reflect on this prayer of David's and come back to it at several points. But a simple list, 8 points. If you're taking notes, I hope you can count to 8. It'll also tell you when the sermon's coming to an end. So number 1, I give because giving is a reflection of my heart. I give because giving is a reflection of my heart. What stands out in this prayer, and really if we were to look at some of the most dynamic prayers in all of the Bible, is that you get this beautiful window into the heart of a person because prayers are very intimate. And we get a window into David's heart, his prayer of giving and the lordship of God over all creation gives us a window, a reflection into his heart and his desire to honor and bless the Lord. Now, those of you who know me really well, I have so many friends here at UPBC, but if you know me well, you know I just love giving gifts. If you've ever read The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, one of those languages is giving gifts. Anybody recognize that concept, right? Yeah, a lot of head nods? Okay. Most of us in marriage counseling have figured this out one way or another. That's not what today's message is about. But the more that I have grown older, I've realized that that's something that just describes me. It fills my love tank to find the perfect gift for someone. And Christmas morning is something I look forward to because I just love seeing my kids and my loved ones open gifts that I've chosen for them, and thoughtful gifts or special gifts or things that I've found over the course of a year. And so that's just who I am. Now, how many here love Christmas more in that you get to see people open gifts that you give to them? Anybody? Yeah. The rest of you are just really selfish, right? That was a trap. I'm joking. I love it when I can give someone a special, thoughtful gift. But anyone with this love language, and any of those who raise their hands, will tell you this, if they have giving gifts as a love language, is they know it's not so much about the gift, it's the sentiment behind it. It's a reflection of thoughtfulness and love and cherishing, because the gift is a reflection of one's heart. So it is with giving to God. I don't want to give my tithe to God out of obligation or duty, but because I delight in who God is. I delight in giving to him because it's a reflection of what's in my heart and my heart towards the Lord. You may never have thought of it this way, but giving in the Bible really begins with the very first verse. In the beginning, God created. And from that moment on, it's all about God giving. Because God is the creator and giver of everything. He created the universe. He created the earth. He created you. He created the substance of your soul. He gave that to you. No one else can attribute creation of your soul than God. That was the great gift he gave to you. He thought you into being. God is a giver. And you may never have considered this, but all giving began with God. And his giving is a reflection of his heart. He wanted you to know his love. Just like a parent to a child, God gave you existence. God is a giver. That's really the overriding theme of David's prayer here. And so we as image bearers of God reflect God's heart when we give. The oxygen that you are breathing right now, God made that for you. He made that for this moment. And David begins his prayers with these beautiful words. I love this phrase, by the way. This is a good one to underline. Praise to you, Lord, who is from everlasting to everlasting. We kind of sweep over those words as if they're just hyperbole on behalf of David's prayer. But it really is beautiful because for all time, God has been doing this. From the very beginning to the fullness of time, from everlasting to everlasting, God is giving. For all time, he's doing this. In our day, it's easy to forget. Old joke, scientist says to God, Lord, we don't need you anymore. Science has figured out a way to create life out of nothing. We can do what you did in the beginning, so we don't need you to give us anymore. God says, oh, is that so? Tell me more. Scientist says, well, we can take dirt and we can form it and we can breathe life into it. And God says, well, that's interesting. Show me. So the scientist bends down towards the ground, takes a clump of soil, starts to mold it, and all of a sudden you hear God interrupt the scientist, says, oh, no. You get your own dirt. Some of you are getting that joke. Everything God has given is a gift. I want to be a giver. Not out of obligation, but as a reflection of my heart. So that's number one. Giving is a reflection of my heart. Number two, I give because I want to honor God's name. I am just like you. Even as those of you say, you're a pastor, you should, maybe have an easier road in this. No, I am just like you in that I fight the temptation to honor other names, even honor my own name. But when I give to God, I'm choosing to honor God's name. David prays this beautifully. He says, yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor. A lot of people in that time wanted to give those attributes towards David. He was the great king, the great warrior king who had led Jerusalem to its fullness and to finally build the temple. Oh, David, yours is the greatness and the power and the glory and majesty and splendor was the temptation. But instead, David makes sure that everyone that hears his prayer knows that his heart is to direct honor towards the Lord. I've often reflected on the fact that we give a lot towards names. We give a lot of money towards things and names. And the fact is that what we give our money towards, we honor. At one point, I owned stock, and when I was much younger, before we had children, I had stock in a tech company. And the more the stock grew, the more I was drawn to honor that company. I wanted to buy their devices and their gadgets. I learned this simple truth. Where you invest your time and your money, you will give honor. Where you invest time and money, you will give honor. But I want to honor the one who is great and who's worthy of glory and majesty and splendor. I hope you do too. Years ago, I began a friendship with a man who was very successful early on in his career. He made obscene amounts of money in his 20s and 30s, and his lifestyle showed it. One day we were in a Bible study together with a group of men from our college days, and we happened upon a passage on giving, 10% to the Lord, and he quite proudly blurted out, "No way, God couldn't possibly expect me to give that much money." And we were all like, did you just say that? Did you just let that out? And he honestly had a ceiling to which God's honor and greatness was worth at that point in his life. And over the years, we had the privilege to watch as his heart softened and he began to see what money couldn't buy. And that was the joy that comes from honoring God with his gifts and fueling ministries and kingdom endeavors. And he began to see that he was gifted in making money so that he could resource ministries. It was amazing. He died when he was 46 years old. Everything he had earned and given was going to be taken from him at a very young age. Had a heart attack just in the middle of the night. And he learned something before he died that I hope all of us could learn before we die. That our younger selves would be proud of, is that your life is not going to be a list of purchases. Your life is going to be about what you honor. And that's what I want my life to be. I want to honor the Lord's name, not my name, not other names, not Apple, not Costco, not Nordstrom, the Lord's name. And he learned, my friend, he learned what I've learned in the third reason why I give. Number 3, I give back to God because God owns everything. Not only did God create everything, God owns everything. For everything in heaven, David says in his prayer, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Praise David. He really believed that. I believe he really believed that. This is the beginning place of lordship. It's the basis of our faith. I have given myself over to the Lord. He owns it all. And every one of us who declares Jesus as Lord of our lives, then that means that our life is now on loan. We have given ourselves to God, and God now wants to use us because he owns us. He owns the rights over us. He purchased us on the cross. And he has given you your life to steward for his glory and your good. You know, the word stewardship is a word we tend to throw around in the church. We don't use it much in the broader culture, but it comes from the Greek word oikonomos, which means somebody who manages a household. A person who doesn't own the household, but manages it. and stewards it. In the ancient world, for instance, stewards, of course, were trusted with everything from seeing that the floors were clean to the finances to the public face of that whole household to hospitality on behalf of the owner. We are not owners, friends, but we have been trusted with resources and the care of everything: creation, gifts and talents, money, time. We have been given the care, responsibility of the gospel and the integrity of the gospel. Everything for the sake of God's purposes in the world. And as the owner of everything, God desires for all things to be redeemed. That's really the sentiment of the whole book of Colossians, is this idea that God wants everything to be redeemed because he owns it all. It belongs to him. Number 4, when I give, it allows God to show up. And here I want to just get a little personal about some things. God is at work. No doubt about it. God is at work in your life and in the world. We sometimes trick ourselves into thinking that we don't see God at work. But we have the privilege of participating in God's work if we so choose. Last week we read in the book of Malachi how God says, "Test me in this. Give me not just a part of the tithe, give me the whole tithe, 10%, and trust me in this if I will not open the floodgates of heaven and pour out for you." I married into an incredible family, the Goddard family in Portland, Oregon, and my in-laws, Sam and Vicky, had a tradition in their business. They were custom home builders, and every year they built a home that they set aside, and they called it the Lord's house. Now, they built many homes, did very well when the economy was good, and they managed to get through the downturn and some of the difficult days. But the Lord's house didn't matter. Every year, the Lord's house took in 20% more than any other home they built. And they put it before the Lord and said, and they really believed this, they were going to test the Lord in this. They put the home on the market, and it would always sell for so much more than other homes that were just the same or in the same area. And they just asked God, this is going to be a house, and the proceeds are going to go to you and to the ministries in your name. Show up. Show up. When is the last time you asked God to show up? When's the last time you asked God to show up? Think about it this way. When you give, you are saying to God, do what you will, Lord. You have the power to take what I have and transform it into something eternal. Listen to what David prays here. I just love this. Verse 12. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. And I just love this phrase. In your hands are strength and power. In your hands. I don't know about you, but when money is in my hands, it doesn't have much power. I'm just not able to do something eternal with money in my hands unless I put it into God's hands. When Jesus builds his church, he does it through our participation in his work. So we are co-workers in the gospel. And I'm so glad that Jesus is the ruler of all things and not me, and that I can trust to put what I have into his hands. And then we see God show up. And when I give, I'm saying, God, show up. Do what you will. Bless this. Double it, triple it, quadruple it. Do what you want. I trust you. And I give it so that you can show up. When's the last time you put something in God's hands and asked him to show up? Some people in this room are unbelievably skilled at making money. When's the last time you just took a sum of money, maybe put it into an account, and you said, I'm going to try to grow this, and I'm going to give it towards a ministry that the Lord might show me is an area I can give to? Try that. Ask God to show up. That's number 4. Number 5, I give because I believe in the we over the me. Let me tell you what I mean by this. Catch what David prays here. Verse 14. But who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. Notice the transition. He starts with I, but then he moves to the we. Who am I and who are my people that we should give? Friends, I'm a prisoner to the power of we. The power of me is so limited and so overrated in our culture. But the power of we, a community, a people, that's powerful. I was always drawn to team sports because the power of we was just something that captivated my imagination, and the experience of doing something together with others was just so meaningful. By myself, by ourselves, not much of consequence will happen to change the world. Yes, there's a handful of people that will really, truly change the trajectory of the world, but not like the power of when we join together, because we are changing the world as a church. One of my favorite stories, and I'll just make this brief, but one of my favorite stories is of Cherish Ministry, Cherish Maru, and a group of people who in around 2000 took a trip to Kenya, of all places. Quite literally on the opposite side of the world. Like take University Place and just go to the exact opposite. You got Kenya, Maru, people we'd never really met or encountered, but some people here in our church got captivated by the power of we. And yeah, they could have given a few gifts and maybe laid an offering and blessed those people and then been done with it, but they came back to our church and they started to captivate the imagination of our congregation. And if I understand it correctly, now some 500 children, men and women, have graduated as a result of that ministry. And Peter Maruga is over here on the side. He's from Kenya. He's one of the ones that helped captivate our imagination. And that is, friends, the power of we. And it wasn't just resources. It wasn't just money. It was the relationships. It was the cultivation of community with one another that helped that happen. And it's just a perfect example of what happens when we get taken hold of by the power of we over the power of me. Number 6, and I got to quicken this. I know, I'm going. Here we go. I give because I don't want to be a taker. Okay? I give because I don't want to be a taker. The Dead Sea in the Middle East is something, it's a very strange place. I was just there a little over a month ago. It receives fresh water from the Jordan River, but it has no outlet. So it doesn't pass the water out. It receives beautiful water from the Sea of Galilee through to the Jordan, from the rivers, but the water goes dank. I mean, it goes really bad. It's gross. You can float in it, but you have to take a shower, okay, afterwards, because it's just gross. And that's why it's the Dead Sea. It receives and does not give away. It's a taker, not a giver. We all know those people who are takers, right? We all know of those or encounter people who are takers, people who take more than they can give or take and never give. I had a friend in college who was a mooch. You know what a mooch is? I'd say, hey, you want to order a pizza? He was a cheapskate, so he'd always say no. But once that pizza arrived, he'd find a way to grab a slice. It was annoying. In fact, he proudly went to weddings for the free food but never brought a gift. It was really sad. I don't want to be like that guy in the kingdom of heaven. And I know you don't either. I don't want to be a Dead Sea type of person, a taker but not a giver. If the scale of giving and receiving isn't tipped towards giving, I have missed the mark. And I want to be an outlet for God's grace and generosity. But if God's generosity stops with me, I'm doing it wrong. And that's a temptation I always have to fight. We always have to fight. My wife is better at this than me, and she teaches me all the time about being a better giver. Now, for different reasons, I want to make sure I have this caveat. For different reasons, you may face a financial setback or just need help because you've fallen on a difficult time. That happens for many people in our community. And during these times, it's okay to receive support for your family and for your friends, even from your family or from your friends, from organizations, even the government. Paul's words in Thessalonians often are abused. They tell people not to receive generosity. But what Paul was getting at was don't exploit people's generosity. And the fact is, a lot of people need help, and God uses friends and family and many outlets to bless you and help you in your time of need. That's how God works. But for others of us, it's just that we need to do a priority change and think about what does it mean for me to be a giver, and not just, and maybe even be aware of how much I receive from others, and be aware of that. Okay, number 7. This is going to be tricky. Okay, are you listening? I'm going to focus here because I don't want emails. I'm probably going to get in trouble for this with a small number of folks, but just hear me out. And this is my list. You can make your own list if you want, but Number 7 is, I give a tithe without restriction because the needs in our church are bigger than my preferences. The needs are bigger than my preferences. If I only gave to ministries that tickled my fancy, I would most definitely, in my heart, be emphasizing the me over the we. And I've shared before that if I led with my personal preferences, some of you have heard me say this before, if I led with my personal preferences, all of my tithe would go towards kids. Because I have a weak spot in my heart for kids. I just melt seeing kids experience the love of God for the first time. And many of you probably are like this. This is something that many in our church feel, okay? For other people, it's justice-related causes or giving towards the poor or our care ministries or expressions of worship. But this is one thing about restricted giving, and what I mean by restricted giving is giving towards ministries in the church that I care singularly about, okay? Is that one thing about restricted giving is in 25 years of ministry, and I'd even challenge all the pastors in the room if you've ever experienced this, I have never seen anyone give towards the electricity bill or sewer bill. Okay? And yet we all know, just like in our own homes, that in order for us to dwell in this place, it takes the fundamentals of warmth and light and bathrooms for us to congregate and bless the Lord. This was fascinating for me, visiting several sites in the Holy Land, which I'm going to be sharing in a couple weeks about. Invite you to be a part of just a session to hear about my trip. But verse 16, I love this. David prays this: Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building you a temple for your holy name. Now, if you get into the specifics, though, and we got to see like a reproduction of the temple that David built, okay, is that there's a section where there were restrooms. Think about it. They had to actually provide space for real human beings to be able to dwell in that place. For the priests even. It was just outside the temple, but that was just something that just caught me unawares. I just didn't even think about the fact that they had to plan for sewers. In fact, in the city of Jerusalem, they even had a gate called the Dung Gate. I won't go into what that does, but you get the point. That sometimes there's realities for the communal life of a church that don't tickle each of our fancies, but they sure matter. They sure matter. And we need every ministry in this church. We need ministry for women and men and children and the specific needs of those demographics. We need to partner with organizations that build homes and serve battered women and those ministries to kids and families who would never darken the door of a church. Amen? We need those. And we need lighting, and we need bathrooms, and we need furnaces if we're to be a place of hospitality and grace where the gospel is shared. And so far this year, one of the things I'll say that I'm just proud of is at UPC, so far this year, we want to give more, but so far this year, we've released $20,000 already to ministries that are serving in our larger community. And I pray we have an abundance in December to give even more. But that's out of the will of what God's kind of told our elders to be doing and our session to be doing, okay? And this is, by the way, something that was really cool that we experienced as a church together was there's times where we do have to do restricted giving, and that was for our building campaign, and we're going to be completing phase 3 later on next late spring, summer. We're hoping to get into the parking lot and finish phase 3, but a whole lot of us gave restricted gifts for that end, and that's a beautiful way to honor the Lord. And those were restricted gifts that for that aim so that we could steward as much of our tithes as possible towards the ongoing ministry and work of our church and not make that a burden upon our ongoing budget. Thank you, friends. I think all of us would say, what a beautiful church we have and what a great place to host and be hospitable towards friends and neighbors. And even so, if you feel led to give above and beyond your tithe towards that project, we still have a long ways to go, but that would be amazing. But in a tithe, I have the conviction that I need to give it to the Lord and let the Lord determine where the need is, not for me to determine it. And that's just me, okay? So that's number 7. And then number 8, I want to close with this, and I got to wrap it up quick. I give because the real treasure is coming. I give because the real treasure is coming. Oh, I can't wait for that day. Paul describes it simply in the alternate text that was read for us from Colossians 3. Talking about the work of the household, but then Paul drops this nugget that inspires what it means to work for the Lord with all of your strength. And some of us, it's that we have careers where we work for the Lord, and we give all our strength to that career and to that work, and it's hard. I know people in this church that work long weeks, And they give their best as if they're giving it to the Lord. But this is what Paul says, and I just love this. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, because you will receive an inheritance. You will receive an inheritance as from the Lord as a reward. I love that. That day is going to be a glorious day. All our giving is going to pay off for an incredible reward when the Lord reveals it all. 8 reasons. That's why I give. We're going to sing a song in just a moment now, and this is really, I think, a perfect hymn, a traditional and historic hymn that reminds us that God is the giver of all things, and that our giving is only a reflection of God's goodness and his heart for us. Will you pray with me? Oh, Lord, what would it be to go around this room and hear the lists of reasons why we give? And I thank you for this church and the history and legacy of UPBC as a church that gives to our city and the broader community, gives so that your name may be honored, gives so that the gospel could be proclaimed. Thank you for our respective careers and blessings. We are a blessed people in this room. Thank you that as David prayed, that we are able to give because you have first given to us. And we have only given you what comes from your hand. Thank you for your gracious and generous hand, Lord Jesus. Bless what we give to you this next year. And we pray this in your name. And everyone said, amen.